Hello, this is Allison Liu, Professor for Public Health 100 at Carolina University, and this lecture is about performance nutrition, and it's also going to be a little bit of a midterm review. So let's get started. So this lecture tends to be pretty popular with students. They like hearing this material, and I hope you will. So let's talk first about the basic metabolic rate. The basic metabolic rate is the measurement of the amount of energy required for the body to maintain its basic functions at rest. So doing nothing. On average, the basic metabolic rate accounts for between 50 and 70% of a person's total daily energy expenditure. The basic metabolic rate tends to decrease as we age by about 1 to 2% every 10 years. So on the left, you will see some formulas for basic metabolic rate and how those have evolved over time as we've learned more. So what are the basic metabolic functions that our body would need to do if we're not doing anything? No activity, just living, just to survive. Those would be things like your heart beating, your breathing, your kidneys cleaning your blood, your liver functioning, things like staying warm. And so those are basic metabolic functions. Moving beyond the basic metabolic functions, let's talk about total energy expenditure. That's the amount of energy a person burns per day. The total. The more active you are, the more energy you will use. And as we already know, this energy comes from food. So when people exercise, they need more energy. People are supposed to exercise, everyone is supposed to exercise 30 minutes a day. What are the benefits of that? Why would that be a recommendation? Here are some of the benefits. Better sleep, feeling more energized, stronger bones, weight control, improved mood, lower cancer risk, improved hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and we know that that's a big problem in our country, more confidence, and improved cardiovascular health. And since we know cardiovascular disease kills more Americans than anything, improving cardiovascular health is really important. So when we talk about that total energy expenditure and our activity level, this is an illustration of how total energy expenditure goes up as our activity level goes up. So on the left, you see sedentary lifestyle. In the middle, you see a sedentary lifestyle plus 30 minutes of moderate exercise. And then you have regular exercise, which is exercise on a regular basis, there on the right. So applications to individual lives would be things like those who have difficulty controlling their weight, they may be overweight, will have an easier time controlling their weight if they exercise regularly. Those who have trouble controlling their weight can eat more food if they exercise regularly while still maintaining a healthy weight. And any amount of exercise has benefits, but regular exercise is the most beneficial. Those who want to improve athletic performance can make sure they are getting enough nutrients to fuel their bodies with a balanced diet that provides the additional calories needed for sport. Changes to nutritional needs for athletes are as follows. More carbohydrates are needed. The message here is that you want to eat more carbohydrates, and the amount needed is based on energy level. So light activity requires a certain amount. High activity is going to require much more. But I don't like it when I hear an athlete say, I don't eat carbohydrates, because that is not good. Everyone needs carbohydrates. I think what they mean is I don't eat a lot of carbohydrates. Or maybe they mean I don't eat too many carbohydrates. But when they say it like that, I don't eat any carbohydrates, that kind of scares me because we know everyone needs it and athletes need carbohydrates even more. So what about protein? I'm going to talk about protein next. So changes in nutritional needs for athletes regarding protein is that they need more. Protein intake for endurance athletes is 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram body weight, and that's higher than for most adults. Then if an athlete is a vegetarian, they would need a little more than that. If they're a strength athlete, a little more than that. And if they're a vegetarian strength athlete, a little more than that. So protein is needed in higher quantities for athletes. So We've learned carbohydrates are needed in more amounts, and we've learned that protein is needed. So what is the recommendation for fat? So fat's a little different. The fat intake recommendation for athletes is about the same as for non-athletes in that it's 20 to 35% of their caloric intake. Now, they may be eating a few more calories than other people because they are athletes, but their percentage of fat intake should be 20 to 35%, just like non-athletes. So fat intakes below 20 should be avoided because they're correlated with reductions in soluble fat, vitamin intake, and also essential amino acid intake. Now, that's true for everyone, but in the athlete, sometimes I'll hear an athlete say, I don't eat fat. Again, that's dangerous. You don't want to not be eating fat because you got to get those fat-soluble vitamins and essential amino acids, and fat is essential to our diets. They're essential to our life, essential to our body's functioning. So the athlete needs to make sure they're eating fat and eating it at a percentage of 20 to 35%. Okay, so supplements and athletes. This is an interesting topic. So there's things out there athletes try to take to maybe improve performance or because they think it's going to be better for them. And we've talked about how supplements are not really regulated by the FDA as drugs. They're regulated like foods. And so there's potential real danger in the fact that these are unproven and they may not do any good and they may do harm. But there's certain supplements that athletes can take that are kind of routine, but not necessarily needed for athletes to take. These are things like iron, calcium, vitamin D, and antioxidant vitamins. So if an athlete is eating adequate amounts of calories, they're going to be getting more micronutrients anyway. They're going to be getting more vitamins and minerals just because they're eating more. And if they're eating a balanced diet, they really don't need any more supplementation beyond that. However, if they wanted to supplement with maybe a multivitamin or something like that, or if they know that there's an issue for them, like with iron or with vitamin D, something like that, then they could supplement. The multivitamin is a really safe way to supplement. It's like an insurance policy that they're getting all the things they need. And it includes these ones listed here that tend to be of interest to athletes: iron, calcium, and vitamin D, and antioxidant vitamins. Okay, so let's talk about when things go wrong with nutrition and athletes. What happens? Well, what if an athlete is not eating enough, like they're not getting enough energy, and so they're deficient in energy? When that happens, they have decreased intake, low energy availability, but they're still expending because they're exercising and training. When that happens, you get health effects and performance effects, and you can see those here. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of real concerns when an athlete is not getting the amount of energy intake they need, okay? Now, certainly they can consume too much. That's harder to do when you're an athlete, though, because they're using so much more. But they need to make sure they're getting enough, okay? What about female athlete triad? So this is a problem for female athletes. In female athlete triad, you have kind of a special situation that creates a constellation of problems that really is not good for these women. What they have is they have disordered eating, and they have low energy intake that can lead to nutrient deficiencies like calcium and other molecules essential to bone health. And then they can have energy restriction that is combined with continued exercise like training, and that creates a situation that's basically like starvation. And starvation is not a situation you ever want to be in. That contributes to a drop in estrogen levels for these women that causes amenorrhea, which is a lack of a menstrual period. Now, there's other medical reasons for amenorrhea. This isn't the only one. But in female athletes, this can be the cause if they have amenorrhea. So no periods, they'll have low estrogen levels, reducing their absorption of calcium and increasing calcium loss from the bones. Because remember, we learned that if the body's blood calcium level is not what it's supposed to be, the body will leach calcium out of the bones to raise the blood calcium level. And so this triangle happens to female athletes that are not getting enough nutrition, and they get into some pretty significant health problems, including osteoporosis and amenorrhea with health consequences later on. So we want to avoid this. What about iron? Athletes are at greater risk for iron deficiency anemia, okay? And so they want to make sure they're getting enough iron. And it's especially problematic for female athletes because women already need more iron than men. So it's like compounding the problem. Now they're athletes too, and they got to make sure they get even more iron, right? But it's true for both men and women. So the message here is that athletes need more iron than non-athletes, and if they do not get it, they will become iron deficient and develop iron deficiency anemia. So what are some iron-rich foods that can help them avoid that? Beef, dried apricots, spinach, eggs, legumes, tofu, broccoli, string beans, pumpkin seeds, chicken, beans of other varieties, fish, and green leafy vegetables are some examples of iron-rich foods that need to be included in the diet to try to make sure they get enough iron. Now, if they're taking a multivitamin with iron in it too, then they're getting a little insurance policy with that. And if they develop iron deficiency anemia and they see a medical provider, they may, tell them what to do to increase it even more. So athletes should make sure they're also getting enough vitamin D and calcium. Some athletes train inside, which would increase their risk of not getting enough vitamin D in their bodies, because remember, vitamin D is made by our skin when we get exposed to sunlight. So if they're training inside in a gym, like they're a gymnast or something, they're inside a lot when they're training hard and they're not getting exposure to sunlight. They also need to make sure they get enough calcium for those bones. All right, so let's talk about dehydration for a minute. Remember when we talked about the electrolytes and we talked about making sure people don't get dehydrated? Well, this is an illustration of dehydration and performance. And you can see that performance goes down, down, down as dehydration happens, okay? So athletes don't want that. They want to perform well. So it's important for them to stay hydrated. Of course, though, they don't want to consume so much water, like forcing themselves to drink water. They don't want to do that because they could develop an electrolyte imbalance. So they want to hydrate well, hydrate appropriate for the situation, but then avoid just consuming massive amounts of water. That's not safe, okay? So revisiting the athletes and consuming ridiculous amounts of water. Sometimes endurance athletes will be at risk for that because of the stress they're putting on their body, like in a marathon or something like that. And they'll need to replace sodium as well as hydrate with water to avoid hyponatremia, which is low blood what? Low blood sodium, okay? So let's look at the effects of exercise on sodium levels. This is an illustration to remind you. Normal blood sodium concentration is illustrated on the left. Then we move to, if they're exercising, water and sodium lost in sweat. So let's say it's really hot, they're working out, they're losing a lot in their sweat, they're losing water, they're losing sodium, and then they're replacing water only, okay? So the illustration on the right shows you how much less sodium, those little circles, is in their body. It essentially dilutes the sodium and causes hyponatremia. Now this can get really, really dangerous if it gets bad enough. Doesn't usually happen, but it can happen. And when it does, it causes body cells to swell. And if that happens in a really important place like the brain, people can even die from it. So that's why they sometimes, when they're in this endurance type of situation like a marathon, they're drinking tons and tons of water. They will also replace sodium to make sure that hyponatremia does not occur. Okay, let's talk about your exam for a moment. Make sure you understand the difference between micronutrients and macronutrients. We've gone over that a lot, but just make sure you know. Make sure you know the overall recommendations for a healthy diet that were covered in the first reading assignments and the first lecture. Review the micronutrients most associated with deficiencies. Because in this class, I'm always going to emphasize the things that could actually happen to you or I wanted you to know like a historical fact, like this deficiency was really important a long time ago and now we've resolved it or something. Sometimes I'm going to want you to know that, but most of the time I'm going to want you to know the ones that could actually happen to you in the modern world. So those two things, historically really significant and we've solved it, or things that could actually happen to you and your family and friends, okay? Those are the things I'm going to emphasize in the class because I try to make this class really practical. Make sure you know about folic acid and its relationship to preventing birth defects, okay? That's an important one. Understand the importance of electrolytes and how they're related. Things like potassium, things like sodium. We just talked about one of those. It's probably on the exam. If I remember correctly, it is. But look at potassium too. Look at all the electrolytes there. Know the anatomy and function of the digestive system. That's very important in nutrition class to understand. We take food in and how it is processed in our body. And we had a lecture about that, and it's in the book as well. Understand energy balance, what we take in, what we use, how the two are related, and healthy ways to balance that. Know about body's water content, like how much of the body is water, and the importance of avoiding dehydrated states. We got a little review about that today, but be sure and look at your older materials about it as well. And know the amount of electrolytes that are needed in terms of potassium, in terms of sodium, the ones that can actually really cause problems for people and they end up like in the emergency room or they end up having a major complication or something like that. Look at that information in your electrolytes section. If there's something you just haven't done, like you just haven't listened to a lecture or something, try to go back and do that. I think it'll help you on your exam. And good luck on that. Just make sure to turn it in on time. Make sure to answer all of the questions. If you have any concerns, please let me know. If you have a technical difficulty with the exam, take a picture of the email you send to tech support, okay? So I have proof you have a technical difficulty. And then email that to me. Hopefully nobody will have a technical difficulty. But I'm just letting you know that's what I need if you do. I need proof that you had one and that you sent an email to tech support about it. But it's rare. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all, the entire session. Sometimes I get like 1 or 2 people. So if that happens to you, let me know. All right, good luck on the exam, everybody. Bye-bye.